Good morning, everybody. That's the classroom bell, so I guess it's time for me to start speaking. Still on my phone on my deck in beautiful Florida. It's the beginning of the warmer weather. Really, this would already be summer on this kind of weather. High 80s, although it's not reached that yet. It's more like 80. Oh, the pool water is getting nice and warm. There's pools all over where I live. All over Florida. You're like a stone's throw away from like a man-made lake or a pool. It's beautiful. Speaking of that, my sister with her nice little house, actually kind of big house, she has just set up her pool again, and it's beautiful. Anyway, so enough about Florida. I'm just saying I'm pretty happy to be here. But I wanted to talk about socialism and communism. Although I want to kind of separate the two a little bit. Most of what I'm going to be talking about is communism and why it doesn't work, what it leads to, and kind of the things we're not paying attention to. A general complaint I have about us is that we don't seem to be capable of paying attention to anything that's going on or to our history, so our current events and our history in any kind of detailed way. We seem to be very apt to simplify and turn everything into kind of a bumper sticker. And if it sounds better, it becomes legend. And then, when the legend becomes truth, print the truth. Kind of like the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. It actually wasn't Paul Revere. It was a guy named Israel. I forget his last name. But it wasn't very conducive to the whole, sounding good. The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere, sounds pretty good, rolls off the tongue pretty good. This guy had, I think, maybe a Polish or a Jewish last name, so it's like, 300 syllables, and his first name is Israel, so, okay, wasn't the guy picked. Also, I think Paul Revere was more involved with the revolution, so they wanted to make it, as him as a leader. They kind of pushed that. Always these narratives. And that goes back as far as humanity. The first person who learned to speak, learned to kind of stretch the truth and lie. So it's expected that we're going to have hyperbole, propaganda, whether it's positive or negative. Like negative propaganda is when somebody's trying to convince you of a lie, in my view, and positive propaganda is when someone's just kind of putting out something that's already happening, like Chevy trucks are good for X because of X, Y, and Z, and they won these awards. They did win these awards. It's true. They are pretty good trucks. We do make good trucks. But they just want you to kind of, reinforce, what you already kind of know or maybe don't know yet. And to me, that's positive propaganda. It's really kind of, when we talk about like Bernays, he was really talking more about positive propaganda. But we've gone pretty negative with it, and there's some reasons for that I might save for another show. But so we have these kind of competing propaganda streams. One is calls itself like democratic socialists, which is the kind of Bernie-crat progressives who, and really it's not so much Bernie that's viewing the world this way in a kind of SJW skewed way, but he's kind of allied himself with a lot of these people, and that really detracts, because I know a lot of people who are really hoping Bernie would become president. So our honorable independent senator from Vermont, they thought a lot of people at least thought that he had the compassion and integrity. Unfortunately, a lot of people also saw that while he's a democratic socialist, and many of his followers really are, there is this kind of vein of SJW communist craziness that kind of goes along with that, unfortunately, and not enough people who are democratic socialists or just liberals or just on the left distance themselves from that. And if they do, it's kind of a weak, I don't believe in violence. It's like, well, how long have you lived on this planet? Do you believe it doesn't exist, or you're a pacifist and you don't want to engage in it? And like, what are you saying? So it's kind of you feel like you're kind of talking to somebody who doesn't have their shit together a lot of the time, because they're kind of backing up SJW belief systems, the kind of politically insane, I don't call it politically correct, because there's nothing correct about it, like this kind of politically insane kind of view of the world. And that boils down to my view of communism. Now, I'm a liberal, but I want to explain what that means, because that doesn't mean that I'm a communist in any way. In fact, it's quite the opposite. So we have industry, right? Call it like a force multiplier. Instead of a guy sitting there like whittling a flute out of some wood, and that might be, the best flute ever made, and then his other flutes might not be so good. You have machines where, a guy might be just kind of maintaining a machine and kind of pulling a lever. Not quite George Jetson, because he's responsible for more than that. I don't know any jobs where it's just like push a button. You usually have to kind of know what the equipment does, or we all have like really, really simple jobs. So we have used industry as this kind of force multiplier. We still have artisans, we have artists, we have all these other things going on, but it's a moneyed system. Now, capitalism is kind of a bit of a different thing that we kind of mix up with just having money. Capitalism is that some people are going to have a whole bunch of money, whether that be private investors or banks, and they could kind of foot the bill, and then they have to be paid back in some way. So they foot like the startup costs, because they're the capitalists, whether it be a bank, a corporation, or it be a private individual or family. They would have the money to put this up. They have the capital. They are capitalists. And so these people, often they own, they gain their wealth, from, successively larger and larger, at least in the beginning, business endeavors. And then they accumulated wealth in some way. And then they put that wealth into factories and hiring people and all that good stuff. Now, that's not a bad thing. I don't think being a liberal means that you hate just like the money system. It's just kind of a tool that we have that can be used for right or wrong. So, the whole, money is evil thing, it's more the love of money is evil. Greed is evil. I would say that that's more what I believe. Maybe I'm a little different from other liberals who might think that money is, just the root of all evil. I think it's greed is the root of all evil. Because as a tool, money just makes things fair, or tries to. So then what's the kind of stance that liberals take that conservatives don't take? Okay. So we're going to have this government, and we're going to have these tax receipts from corporations, from people's private income, from however they make it. So we're going to have this tax revenue that comes in, and that's really where liberal and conservative come in. The right and left of the aisle are talking about how do they want to spend this revenue from taxes. And for the most part, a lot of conservatives and liberals agree that we're going to have some sort of military. It's really the level of the military that we argue about, not that if we have it or not. And we're going to have these kind of services like emergency services, police, EMTs, hospitals. We kind of all agree on that. So the basis of our society, no one's saying let's get rid of hospitals or the police. Even when you have certain people complaining, let's say Black Lives Matter against white police or police in general, because many of them are black that consider, that have, they complain about shooting, black teenagers or, just black men most of the time, some black women, I guess, although you don't really hear about that much. No one says let's get rid of the police. They're just saying let's make sure the police do their job right. and don't just light up everybody in dark-skinned neighborhoods. Right, so the complaint isn't let's get rid of police, let's get rid of firemen, let's get rid of all these things that we depend on, and that have really made a very stable society by having these kind of you could kind of say socialist, but it depends on how wide you define socialist. These are kind of we see these as essential services. Okay, so because of our industry, because of the capital that's being put into the industry by the quote-unquote capitalists, we have these kind of excesses of manpower, of money, of GDP, and just of kind of the created products of this capitalism. Although I don't want to cast it too widely, just like the moneyed system, we have these excesses, and that's great, right? Capitalism kind of pushes people to be creative. Again, I keep kind of misusing the word because I'm just kind of trying to differentiate having this tool of money as opposed to just capitalism. Having this tool of money pushes us to be creative, to create our own independence, to create products, to create companies, it's basically a creation-oriented type of thing. And that's the positive kind of influence of money kind of pushing the engines of society, which is us, to, oil up that engine and keep it running. And that's great. You show up for your job, or you have a company and they show up for their job. And, there's all these great things that kind of come out of the moneyed system and the tool that is money as a fair medium of exchange. I could probably spend all day telling you how that's gone awry, but I'll just say simply that most of the systems we've come up with are pretty unstable. They're not kind of this rock-solid kind of brutal empire that's going to last 1,000 years, and any dissenters will be automatically killed and everyone will be indoctrinated. We don't want that. Unfortunately, that's kind of like the closest to stability we have. But of course, it's unstable in that eventually, no matter how powerful the empire is, the dissenters, especially as an empire kind of gets weaker for whatever reason as it goes through its ups and downs, eventually the dissenters will have chances to kind of rebel. And that could spiral down, and then you kind of get a fall of empire, right? So no empire has really survived. It's always kind of fallen down, but it lasts the longest out of our systems of government. Now, a moneyed system is actually a stabilizing influence because of the fairness of it, okay? You injured me to the tune of $3,000. The court gives me that plus court costs, and I go off on my merry way pretty satisfied. All right, so if everything kind of works out, the judicial branch, etc., the congressional branch creating the laws that we, for the most part, agree are fair, then things kind of work out, and people go through whatever government mechanism and are pretty satisfied with the result. So let's say somebody banged up your car and the repairs cost that $3,000, and then you prove that they did that in a court of law, and then you get that remuneration, and that's that. Much cleaner than, going to their house with a gang of people and maybe some bats and going to, beat them up and try to drain $3,000 out of them, which they may not even have at that point, so you'd have to take property or whatever. So it's kind of a good system. It's a fair system, and nobody wants to tear it down. They want to fix it, and perhaps institute maybe some other ways of doing things into it. But what we can't do is go all the way towards another system. Right now we're a mixed system. We have the safety net. We have emergency services, or what is called essential services. We have publicly funded education. We have things that are kind of a mix of socialism and democracy as far as our political system, which is really more based on a constitution than anything else, because you can't make a law that supersedes the Constitution. That's exactly what the Supreme Court is for. Now, this is stuff we should have all kind of learned in our civics classes, unfortunately. Education is a problem right now, and hopefully we'll kind of figure that out, because you're not going to throw out an entire system that for the most part is working because it isn't working for this person, or it doesn't work in this way. You want to address those situations, and you want to make it better and better, but you don't want to throw out the infrastructure. It would kind of be like if we threw out all the roads and bridges, right? And then we'd have to make sort of like flying cars. Do we really want to do that? Because then what happens when you have like heavy stuff that you gotta transport over big trucks? Then you're not going to have that infrastructure anymore, because you created a flying car infrastructure that only works in one way. So even if your system, let's say prior to you trying to change it, only works for, let's say, half the people, you want to kind of create a mixed system that will work for the other half, and not throw away the system or detract from it to such a point that it can't exist, unless you have like this huge disparity where 50% of the people, to put it in kind of terms everyone can understand, make like $3 million a year, and the other 50% have nothing, like absolutely no. It's kind of impossible, but they have like absolutely no income. A system like that, then you say, okay, we can't have the $3 million a year people. They've robbed basically everybody else, and you can kind of figure out how they did that. Speaking of robbery, that's kind of what this boils down to. Let's say I work, I give into, I pay my taxes, I pay my Social Security taxes, I pay my disability stuff, I pay my whatever safety net that we have, and then if something happens, you go to the appropriate agency and get your entitlement because you paid into it. All right, that's the perfect world. Let's say, you don't get it until you're a certain age, but it's still kind of an insurance policy, because you can get it earlier if you're disabled, like let's say with Social Security. So there's this kind of safety net we've all put in place that we've agreed upon, although it's kind of often in the halls of power, it's kind of pulling teeth because of their kind of agendas. But we succeeded in putting in a safety net, however imperfect it is, that at least the concept means well, right? And the concept is fair because, I put in and then I retire, and then the next generation puts in and then they retire, and the generation after them, and there's, just kind of playing, with the kind of edges of it. Are we going to, supply prescription drugs for free, or is it going to be subsidized, or is it going to be a donut hole? Those kind of things are mostly what we kind of argue about as far as, the details of it. But the basic concepts, there's not much dissent to it. There are like extreme conservatives, or really more extreme Republicans, that are into the whole get rid of Social Security thing because that's a meme for them. Right? Like, oh yeah, this is my bumper sticker kind of, I'll get votes if I tell everybody I'm going to get rid of it. And they may have that personal belief for whatever reason, but it's very short-sighted, right? When we're not really capable of making money anymore through work, through our own income, then we have this thing that picks up and says, okay, you're old now, you have health problems, we kind of expect around this age you're really not going to be able to work. We'll allow you to work longer if you want. Blah blah blah. There's this whole system. Oh, your spouse died, you get part of theirs. There's this whole kind of system in place, and we're always kind of trying to tweak it to make it more fair. Right? There are very few people that are like, oh, I want to get rid of Social Security. No, when they're saying, when there's kind of a propaganda stream that's saying that, we're talking about kind of reducing entitlements, not getting rid of them. It's really the issue. And most people don't want to even reduce it, right? If anything, they want to raise it. So we got to be kind of sure what we're talking about here. So we give into the system, we get back this care in our elderly years, and that didn't come out too easily. A little bit of dry mouth. So I'm going to sip on my bulletproof decaf coffee. The coconut oil and the butter in there really help kind of coat my throat because I talk so much and so quickly sometimes. So a little advice for you other broadcasters. So here's the deal. That's kind of fair, right? And I think most of us would agree that the basics of the system is fair, but there are, people cheating. Typically the kind of business owner class sees it as like the welfare queens cheating, and the poorer people, people who aren't in the business class, see it as the business class cheating. And there's a little bit of truth on both sides. So, but that's kind of another thing that has to be tweaked, and rules have to be enforced, and certain groups have to be disempowered in order to kind of go after them and arrest them and put them in jail when appropriate. So we have this whole judicial, who kind of decides the laws and how they're applied. Congress, who through the representation, not a direct democracy, but through a representative democracy, determines the laws. Also, the executive branch is part of kind of leading that whole shindig. So what's wrong with communism, though? There is a different mentality with communism that we just don't agree with. Even the people who tout it don't really agree with it. They're thinking more of a better safety net, and that's understandable. There are some problems with our safety net, and I definitely get, as a liberal, I want a better safety net for everybody, because I think that we can do a much smoother job of helping people become independent, and helping people who can't be independent or can only be kind of like part-time independent. That's something that we can do a better job at. Right now, we kind of have a handout welfare state as opposed to a hand-up welfare state. And there are some, programs within every state. Even if you're in like the deep south, there are programs within the states and the counties and everything that are trying to kind of give that helping hand. But it's not something we're that great at yet. So we're kind of stuck with doing the handouts until we get better at more of a helping hand and what that even means. Because remember, we instituted this stuff during the early 30s, and we've kind of forgotten what we're trying to do. So we have to that's why history is so important, to kind of know in a detailed fashion what the meaning of all this was, what the meaning of this kind of safety net, this kind of, welfare backup as opposed to welfare society. So there's a view of the government as a parent, not the word apparent, two words, a parent, that's kind of seeped into our zeitgeist. And it's not even the typical parent that kind of teaches you how to do things, but and be independent and make money and, have a family and all that stuff that you want to, supposedly do. Not everybody, but most people. it's more of a parent that just gives you things. That just says, here, I'm rich, I'm the rich parent, and I'm just going to give you stuff. I'm not going to teach you how to do anything. I'm not going to even I'm not even going to really encourage your independence. I'm just going to, if you don't get it, if you don't smoothly transition from young adulthood to actual adulthood, then I'm here to help you in a kind of take care of you type of way, like 100% take care of you type of way. And it's a very unhealthy way to look at the government because despite the programs we've been able to make for ourselves and push through and push for. Remember, people were pushing Roosevelt to have these social programs throughout the years after that, and quite a few years before that, there were people pushing for these kind of fair social programs. Not 0 hours a week of work, but 40 hours. And that's kind of gotten messed up because anytime you create a system, people are going to kind of cheat it. And I could go into that in another show, but I'll try to stick on topic right now. Now, we can't have this kind of brutal empire. Yes, it would last. And for the people who are in charge of the empire, perhaps, or some sort of nobility, it would be great. But for everybody else, it would suck. And honestly, when it sucks for everybody else, it's going to kind of start sucking for even the people in charge. So it really doesn't really help anybody. Unless you're some sort of kind of like figurehead like they have in Britain, where you don't really have to do much, but you own so much, then that's kind of fun. I'm sure most of us would want to be royalty like that. But if you're actually responsible for something, that's quite a bit less fun. So nobody's really into the idea of, and that's, like I said, both sides, the peasants and the nobility, they don't really want to go through this kind of brutal empire anymore. But unfortunately, the other ways of doing things we have proved to be very unstable, including a direct democracy, highly unstable, doesn't last very long. A republic like Rome used to be before it became a brutal empire, those are a bit more stable, but still there's an inherent instability. It really depends on your constitution and how you use it. So it would be a smart idea to start calling us a constitutional republic, because that's really what's important. The republic is kind of stable because we elect representatives who it's supposed to be their full-time job to govern, but we're really supposed to be in charge. I know that's not really happening these days, and there's a lot of things screwed up, but that's the idea. By elections, we're electing people who are going to do our bidding, like placing us as the noble and them as the peasant who's supposed to, the servant of the people. And those always start out great, all right, when everybody kind of has that idea in their head. And then a few generations later, everything kind of starts to degrade. And in the past, we didn't really have the communication systems we have now. So we have a shot of kind of saving our republic. But in the past, 200 years, wow, and they don't, when people say like things fall apart, that doesn't mean that they're going to cease to exist. It's just that the form of government might change, to an oligarchy, like many people are saying we have now. So it's kind of like the democracies and the republics tend to end and go into some other form of government. They don't just disappear off the face of the earth. They're actually, there's kind of like a leftover success with them. Because they are successful in some ways that people are going to try to keep, although they may not know how to do that. Again, communication, having like detailed histories of what's happened in the past is very important. One of the things that's happened in the past, that communism has never successfully been tried. when I say that, I don't mean that, oh, none of them are perfect communism. I'm not one of those people. I'm saying that they've never been a success. In fact, they've been quite the opposite. They usually turn into a police state and kind of a barbaric state that has to basically kill or jail or, I don't know, re-educate all dissenters. Right? It's a one-party system, communism. It can't have multiple parties. I'm not saying two parties is that much better, but a communist state really can't have more than one party. And they always kind of fall apart from within because the barbarity that's necessary to keep one running is so obvious and so blatant that eventually some group is going to gain enough power to kind of overthrow. And again, it could be, just going into a different type of government. It doesn't mean that like when the Russian Empire fell, Russia wasn't wiped off the map. It just changed its government style and became more of a mixed government with capitalism and communism, or capitalism and more what we call socialism. So, what's this kind of parental attitude? Like I said, kind of the impudent child, kind of the spoiled child, kind of the oppositional child. You're supposed to provide for me. Except with a child, by the time they get to an independent age, if they're raised correctly, it's like, okay, I'm supposed to provide for me and maybe soon someone else. My own children. I have to kind of get in that mode and do that because that's what I want. I want the wife. I want the children. I want the life. I want the minivan and the two-floor house. So you have your goals. You want your vacations every year, or you want a really, really cool retirement where you travel the world so you don't take vacations. Whatever you want. There's a lot of freedom involved in it that we don't necessarily take advantage of, which is one of the mistakes that I think our society has been a little bit limited as far as that. We're much better at being creative as far as like building gadgets than we are with how we want our lives to go. But anyway, that's a tangent. There's this kind of, like I said, kind of like oppositional, defiant child that is too old to be that way, right? It's like, wait a second. Why are you looking at me to pay your rent? Why are you looking at me? I mean, yeah, we have the safety net, which we all kind of agree to give into. And there are services that, like I said, they need to be done better. But unless you're kind of like completely disabled or, really heavily disabled, you can't expect much from that person as far as kind of contributing, let's say they were injured, blah, blah, blah. And even with that, like let's say someone's injured, most states have some sort of workers' comp rules in courts where they'll reimburse you, for work you're missing or some disability you now have because of the injury. So I've gone through that system, so I know quite a bit about it. Because I was injured. And is it the funnest system to go through? No. Is there a lot of bullshit with the enemy lawyers trying to really skew reality so they don't have to pay you? Yeah, there's a lot of that shit. But again, it's a fixable system. The basics of the system kind of work. Maybe it would work better if you could sue employers instead of having kind of like the workers' comp system. But those are questions we can kind of look at. And as a liberal, I tend to kind of want people to be better taken care of, right? And conservatives want people to be less taken care of, to be just strictly honest, right, by the state, because they see it as their money going into this, right? And a lot of it is, right? If you're from a small business owner on up, you're going to have a lot more money to play with. even if it's all going out to overhead, you're still kind of starting with a much bigger pile, and you can take kind of whatever salary you want. So you're going to give yourself a decent salary. I've known a lot of kind of like private company retailers that pay their employees absolute caca. There's another story with the minimum wage, but they pay their employees caca, and then they like drive around in like BMW 4x4s, right? So there's if you own a business, you can kind of give more to yourself and try to give as little to everyone else as possible. So you're going to be kind of a part of a different class that's going to get more highly taxed. I agree with kind of simplifying everything, even if we have to lower the tax codes to do that, and it becomes kind of like a net zero gain until there's more economic growth. I'm fine with that. That makes a lot of sense. But having low taxes and having like a really extensive safety net like some European countries have, that's not really economically feasible. But we're already in debt. If we did that, we might actually default. So it's we can't have both. So do we want the economic growth, or do we want the high taxes and this kind of socialist safety net? It's kind of a one or the other choice. But what most countries do is they don't lower it that much. Maybe it's 15% for companies, but for people making over a certain amount, it's 25. I think the Trump proposal was 15, 25, and 35. But you have to be making like six figures or more to like be going into the 35. So, most of the people, I think 50% of the country is below 30,000 for each individual. So it's going to be, for each individual with an income. So it's, from work. So it's going to be, the majority of people are not going to get the 35% rate. I'm not sure where they put that at. But that's something that's probably being negotiated right now, right? Now, this kind of really extensive safety net isn't really what most people signed up for. When you give away your economic freedom, you also give away parts of your other freedoms, or at least you diminish them. Like, let's say you go and say, I'm partially disabled, I want partial disability. You're giving up your freedom to not have anybody know about what's medically going on with you because you have to tell them. So now, that's kind of, it's not public record. They don't, blast it out on the internet, but it's, you've just kind of lost that freedom, right? To be kind of left alone, because you're asking for your, assuming, you're under 65, you're asking for some of your benefits early, which puts them in a position where, you're going to take it early. That's not what we're supposed to do. So, that's going to kind of be coming out of other people's pockets. So you're kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul, right? But we're pretty charitable. So we're kind of like, okay, the guy's half disabled. Let's give him, half until, and he has to work for the other half. Okay, that kind of works. Most of us agree with that. That's no big deal. That's not like a big conservative sticking point. In fact, in many ways, they see Social Security as something they can't even really go near because they know their constituencies will, raid their office with pitchforks and torches. So it's not like, people don't appreciate the social net that we have. I'm not sure you could even call, once you're retired, to have that. Is that really a social net, or is that just how we worked out the retirement system? I guess you could argue that you could save up for retirement and blah, blah, blah. But, if most of the country is making 30,000, if that's kind of the average, or at least like a bunch of people are doing that. There's a big spike over there around that number. Then we're talking a lot of people not going to be able to afford to save for retirement. And I guess they're okay with that because Social Security is there, and the benefits from that. So, it could be kind of argued as a transfer of payments from the, young to the old. But then when you're old, you get the same transfer of payments, so it's pretty fair. Is it more like an insurance? But insurance, there has to be people not using the insurance. So once you hit 65, maybe only the disability part of it is insurance. We can kind of philosophize about, how to see it. But nobody's really arguing to get rid of it. You have some conservatives arguing to kind of lower it so that people would be more dependent on their own savings and IRAs and stuff like that. But we wouldn't even think about that unless there was there were good rules with whatever IRA and it was right for us, right? So there's a kind of back and forth going on. Not working out perfectly in some with regard to some issues, not working well at all. It's definitely like a failing grade in many ways, in some ways. And, that needs to be looked at. And I agree. And I want to be kind of generous so that when, I have to use these services, they're not inadequate. I don't end up homeless, all that kind of good stuff. Now, the European countries that we often tout, they've done that, but with a very high tax rate. And you got to accept that, a big chunk of the country just really isn't willing to have this huge tax rate. And, of course, the economic growth that it destroys. A lot of people kind of get stuck on one rung of the ladder. In a system like ours that's skewed more towards independence and individuality, the ladder to success is much easier. To go from, I'm not just talking about going from like a poor college student, but like going from, let's say your parents were working class, you might be, a scientist and actually, make much more money than them, or you might get an MBA and run a business, and eventually you end up being, super business guy or gal, and, then you really make money as a CEO or something. So there's like a ladder of success that many of the rungs are kind of missing or way too far apart in many of these kind of socialist countries. And they're mixed too, though, right? So we're really just talking about the kind of mix we want, not do we want to be communist. So already, like, no one really agrees except some kind of ill-informed, college students and the professors that indoctrinate them, that communism could in any way be a viable system. It's more than a bit unstable, like democracy is, and then the republic, which is a little bit less. And sure, we're going to have to figure out better forms of government, but communism would be kind of a step backwards. Even if you're like talking about kind of like a pseudo-communism with like resource-based, maybe that could be explored and see if it would be a better system as far as the kind of basis for the system, the pillars it stands on. But we've already tried communism, and it's fucking horrid. It's ugly, and it's killed a lot of people because, like I said, you have to destroy all dissent. You have to, anybody who thinks, oh, I want to, sell cigarettes out of my car, go acquire whatever and sell it, on the black market so I can have more because I want more, right? I want more than this life of standing in bread lines or whatever. I want to be able to pay somebody to stand in the bread line for me, the communistic success. There will always be those people, and you always have to be kind of shit hammering them So you need like a very sheeple type populace. There's a lot of propaganda that goes into communism where they're kind of taking away your right to have more because you earned more, right? They're saying anything you produce, even if it's extra, should go to the state to be divvied up after they get the best share to everyone else, so that they have like, a certain level that they're at as far as, above the poverty line or slightly above it. So you have less desperately poor people because you're artificially keeping a lot of people from being that. But you're not doing it by raising the boats. You're not doing it by raising the tide, and therefore all boats. You're doing it by taking away the productivity of somebody else. Not letting them have it. In the simplest terms, you're not letting people have their own productivity back. Like if you're in let's say you're in a system, more like the American system, where you work an extra 10 hours, you work really hard, so your boss always gives you extra hours, so you make more money. So there's something in it for you. Sorry, I had to check my coffee. I thought a bug fell into it. Yeah, I got a screen deck, but it doesn't always seem to work. Anyway, so if you're, let's say you're in a communist factory and you work really hard, you're not getting anything else. You're not getting like a extra pair of shoes or anything. You're just hey, thank you. You've helped the system, but you haven't helped yourself in any way, and that's unfair. Just blatantly unfair. So it's already kind of a type of thievery, because now your productivity, you may be demanded to work really hard. They may put you in some sort of work camp that basically works you to death like a slave, but you're just giving into the system. It's not like they're letting you retire early because you were a slave. And of course, it's against your will. So it's, if you have any kind of brains in your head, it's going to be against your will. Where else do we see communism? Like in China, they have to have suicide nets outside of the, the iPod factory or the iPad factory, or the iPhone. I forget which product they were making. I think it was the iPhone. But all the factories had to have suicide nets so people couldn't successfully kill themselves, rather than be, these economic slaves, these work slaves. Well, I guess all slaves are work slaves. But these are in a factory. I'm not sure how you could kind of verbally separate that. So, and the whole argument that communism hasn't been tried correctly, and that's why it hasn't worked. No, it's the inherent flaws of communism. There's no reward for working harder, so you don't. In fact, you try to get everybody else to work less too, right? Until you become kind of management, and then you're sitting there, cracking a whip like an ancient Egyptian. What are they called? There was actually a name for the slave drivers in Egypt. I forget what it is, like vizier or something like that. And they would actually, sit there with a whip and whip people to keep them working. And that's what you kind of become, because you have to, this factory has to make XYZ amount of shoes. People working there don't care. Right? They don't think there's a big difference between them working 8 hours and making shoes or them working 12 hours. They don't see the difference. Right? They don't realize that maybe down the line they'll get their shoes quicker if they make the shoes. The people don't put two and two together like that. It's just not a human trait. They just see right now I'm sitting on the same lines. I'm getting the same stuff. And if I do well and work hard, I'm still getting the same stuff. I'm still waiting on the same lines. So it doesn't work that way. Right? There has to be kind of a mixed system. That in a way kind of allows both. But when I say that, then it ceases to be communism. It's something else. It's more of a safety net, more socialism or democratic socialism. In a way, we kind of already have democratic socialism in that we vote for these kind of safety net items and these programs a lot of the time, even though sometimes it's actually the politicians who come up with these programs. A lot of times it's kind of us saying we need X, Y, Z, and that's their response. Whether it's a good response or not, that's a different question. So a lot of people need to be fired? Probably. They're just not doing a good job. That's why one of the points I always make is that maybe politicians shouldn't be in charge of healthcare. They should have some sort of real study of it with real scientists and real healthcare providers, other than just, shooting off their mouths about it. They really shouldn't be involved in the actual creation of it because they're just going to fuck it up. Can they make a legal framework for it? Kinda. But the more they get involved beyond that, it's kind of like you have a boss who does all the necessary things to, keep the company rolling, right? But they also try to get like kind of way too involved in how you, let's say, pack up a shelf or something, or, how you're kind of doing whatever task you need to do. And they kind of keep getting into how you're supposed to do that without really having any experience in that, because they're hired as a manager and they never worked in it before, let's say. That's kind of the analogy I would make, because that's kind of what happens a lot in government. They usually come from a different class of people, which is the problem, I see. So they're not road workers or hospital workers or whatever before they get into these things that they're in charge of. It's kind of like a lot of people complained about Betsy DeVos because she wasn't a teacher before she was an education advocate. And most of the secretaries of education had been teachers. So it was kind of well, what the hell? She has to be a teacher. And she wasn't. So there was a lot of kind of grief on that. And that's kind of a natural complaint to have because that's the kind of the system we've had. What's funny is that because of the teachers union and the power of the teachers union, you kind of don't want a teacher. You want a better administrator. But that's another segment. So the communism, and here's what the conservatives kind of always go back to. It's really organized thievery. I'm robbing Peter to pay Paul. But for me, there's a philosophy behind it where what you put in, you want out more than what you put in. Because the government is like this generous parent who has made all this money, and you deserve your fair share of it. But it's not. It's just not apparent, right? And we should stop trying to make it one. Because we're going to lose our freedoms that way. The more they kind of play at being parent, the more they're going to demand loss of freedoms in order to kind of execute all these parental responsibilities. Let's say you have a parent in real life and they're taking care of you. They get to decide where you live. They get to decide what car they buy. They get to decide what size house is going to be. They get to decide how much to give you for clothes, even if you're shopping yourself, right? The parent, you have nothing. The parent's completely responsible for you, and therefore, in a lot of ways, has every decision. Any real decision is made by them because they're the ones with all the money. They can just not give you money, right? So the more we want to make the government the parent, the more they're going to be in that role, and we don't want them in that role. And I used before with Social Security, if you're going to say, I'm disabled, I want my stuff early, they're going to say, well, where's your medical records? and now you have to reveal your medical records to the government, right? What if it wasn't such a nice government? What if we had kind of a fucked up government that then goes out and sells that information to insurance companies, and now they know exactly what's going on with you, and they could, refuse you insurance because you have pre-existing conditions, or they don't like the cut of your hair. They're the parent. They make those decisions, right? We don't. I know I need better explanations for this, and a lot of conservatives actually offer that. But in this case, I agree. We don't want a parental system. We want a helping hand. And yes, some handouts when appropriate, because somebody just can't, do what they need to do. And we need to have some positive propaganda as far as teaching people how to, how to have like an independent life, and how to do all these things to kind of transition to adulthood. That may be a better program to look into, right? In fact, in many ways, that's what a public education was for. To kind of, parents aren't necessarily preparing their children to be adults, so let's go in and, hire these people to teach them the things they need to know. And we'll all pay for it, right? And therefore we all get the kind of benefits of it. And then there's kind of the argument that, okay, but what if you're wealthy, you pay you pay more taxes, because even if you pay the same percentage, it's off of a higher income, so it's more. So you pay extra taxes than your neighbor, but you don't like the educational system, so you go to a private school. So let's say your neighbor's child is getting $10,000 a year in resources, but you're not using that, so you're getting nothing, right? And you're getting to pay for the other child's, or at least in part, the pot that you give more into is actually going to this other child, but not even your own. And now maybe you have to pay $20,000, right, out of your pocket to get your kid a good education. So we're talking about, of course, things are much more complicated than that, but we're talking about some of the pillars, the philosophy of it. And this is why people get angry. I'm making a decent amount, especially if they're middle class and they're not rich. I'm getting, I'm paying XYZ in taxes, so I'm paying extra than my neighbor. But my child, maybe they have special needs and they have to be sent to a special school. And so they're paying for that out of pocket because they make too much money to get what the child next door might get for free. And they're also giving into the pool for the child next door, but not getting anything for their child. See how kind of inherently unfair that might seem to people? So it'd almost be a little crazy to be kind of like that middle class family, or executive branch of the family, father and mother. So it'd be a little crazy to be in that executive branch and be conscious of what's going on and not be a little pissed. So they're always trying to balance that out, right? My idea was always like, okay, if you give $10,000 for the public school, you give $10,000 for the private school, so they only pay $10,000, right? So they're getting back what they put in. But that's pretty complicated, and I'm not going to go too far into that. This kind of, especially with the Democrats, it seems, And they're such a mixed bag of craziness that I don't even know, are they left, are they liberal, like what's really the definition of it? It just seems that they're bought and paid for, that's really the only thing I could see that kind of goes across most Democrats. They have this idea of, okay, we'll stay in power by robbing Peter and paying Paul, to the point to the point where they'll even import from other countries more Pauls. Talk about a double smack in the face. If you're, through hard work, I mean, if you're kind of a scumbag and you just kind of stole from old ladies, that's one thing. But if through hard work, you created a company, hired a bunch of people, created all this profit, and now, the company gets taxed, then you get taxed. Your company pays more than the guy next door. You pay more than the guy next door. And he gets all the benefits. It's like, what? You really start to feel like this is not a government that in any way represents me. So there's work to be done, right? In a almost purely socialist environment, everything would be progressive as far as the more you make, the more we take, the higher percentage we take. Even though we're taking more just by having the same percentage, we're going to increase it even more. You're going to be, you're going to get usage taxes. Your business uses a bridge, and they have to use it every day, so now you're going to have to pay like $15 to go over a bridge. So it'll be $30 a day. There's all this stuff where it's kind of like they just keep taking and taking and taking. And that's not sustainable, not economically sustainable, because you're kind of going to impoverish everybody, and then they'll all be on the dole. And then now you can't afford to give anything to anybody because nobody's actually paying the bills because they're all just taking. Now, it'd be one thing if it's like, okay, you're successful, and let's say, your kid, 18 years, or it's less than that. What am I talking about? The 12 years that your kid's in public school or private school before college. It would be one thing if, during that time, you're using up some of the money you put in. It's more like a shell game. That would be a little bit more fair, wouldn't it? It's like, okay, I'm putting in all this tax money, but then when my kid goes to school, I get some of it back. That would be more fair. Instead, we have, family plus loans. So now you got to indebt yourself with interest. It's a pretty fucked up system. Now, do I agree with some of the social programs that Bernie put out? I think we should be working towards it, absolutely. But kind of this violent overthrow of the system we have now in order to create a kind of heavily socialist system that is going to basically screw over a large percentage of the populace. Maybe not so much. We got to figure out kind of better ways, like ways to make healthcare cheaper, to be on the edge of being efficient, to be able to transport records through maybe a thumb drive and some sort of terminal that you go to, and it pulls up your patient's records as long as they give you a thumbprint or something. All these different little things to kind of save money, make things more efficient. Right, and then we can go, oh, look what we did. Through our ingenuity, we lowered the price of healthcare, and now we can afford it. We can afford for those people who can't afford it for themselves, who are still net taxpayers, but it's more through sales tax and stuff like that, so it's not exactly a huge amount. Well, we can afford to kind of supply better healthcare for them, right, or at least some healthcare. But that's not where the argument is it? No, it's the government is this kind of amorphous mass that has nothing to do with us, that just has money. That's where the kind of parental role comes in, where, okay, the government is this parent, and like I said, this kind of, kind of mean-spirited child, and they don't want to like learn how to become independent. And like I said, I'm a liberal. If you got problems, I really think we should have better programs right now and going into the future to help you. But at the same time, just kind of, handing out, that doesn't really work for anybody. It doesn't work for the people who are getting it, because you're going to get so little that you're going to be, in many ways, kind of driven to be kind of, there's money on the table, might as well take it. I mean, you're going to kind of have your nobility driven out of you. You're going to be put in kind of a desperate position. So the more people who are taking from the coffers, the less everybody gets. And that is actually literal in many government programs. One of the things that kind of made me happy, I went to get some health care from a government program. Like I said, I'm not against it. I have some issues now, and I'm working out of those issues. And there's a program that can help me in my county, and it's kind of tied into the local hospital. So they're really like, oh, this would be great because we'll get some money from the government for this. So it kind of creates like a little bit of a almost like a permanent cash cycle. Right? You don't have to worry about like people not showing up to the hospital, because you're their healthcare provider. So you're always going to get a certain amount. So it's probably good for them too, right? Even though they kind of cut the rates a lot for their doctors and everything. It's kind of a win-win. And before that, I had other programs that were completely free. And they were horrid programs, horrible. And I mean, up in New York, down here in Florida now, I mean, it's just horrible bullshit, not reasonable facsimiles of healthcare. And that's kind of what happens. The more people that are kind of drawing from it. One of the big points is that it was New York City and then Miami, right? So it's like two big cities with a lot of people that need healthcare. And everybody kind of got really shitty healthcare because of that, because there were so many people that needed it and that they couldn't really provide it. So they just didn't. They just kind of played at, looking like they're providing it, kind of like security at an airport. So anyway, these kind of, look at how successful, Northern Europe is. I mean, it's successful for a lot of reasons. But there's also kind of problems with their system. Like if you look at like nationalized healthcare in Canada, not so great. You may need an operation next week and you don't get it until like next year. And that's actually kind of a common horror story. There's also, there is rationing, right? Since you don't have like a private insurance, if it's like on the government dole and you need like some $3,000 a month medication and it's going to, give you a couple months, everyone, the, usual kind of example that's used for that. How often that happens, I don't know. So, but there are some problems with it that got to be looked into before you can kind of even think about it. And one of the things I saw, one of my YouTube videos, great little show I was watching, they were talking about at your typical Canadian hospital, quote unquote. It's not really a hospital; it's more of like a clinic, and it doesn't have much of the equipment that it needs to do its job. So it's always kind of sending you to a super hospital, which in the United States we just call a hospital, right? Because at every hospital in the United States, there is going to be an MRI machine, an X-ray machine, like all the necessary equipment to do it there. We may have a clinical system too, but it's like, just a partial system. No one's forced into it. unless, they just don't have the money. So it's something that you got to kind of like maturely look at. Healthcare, education, all that stuff you got to look at more maturely and look at more of the bigger picture and not just look at it as like, oh, I thought the government is rich. Why doesn't it give me stuff? That's not really the attitude to have because you are the government. You are the government coffers. At some point, we may be politically in charge again. In some ways, we kind of are still. We can definitely kind of assert pressure in certain ways. But this whole idea of the government kind of being this kind of amorphous parental entity that you can kind of just get stuff from, it's not a real concept. It's imaginary. Right? Because you have the other half of people, or more, that aren't on the far left, that are looking at it as levels of a safety net and, what we can provide in case something bad happens. You lose your job, you're unemployed, you get sick, right? We want to have that for, those kind of things happening. Who's going to pay the bills? Who's going to take care of my kids? So we have these services that we kind of want to give each other as mutual adults. And of course, services we want to give our kids, the disabled, new immigrants. There are things that we want to do that we think are fair because a lot of us have gone through it. We were kids. We either are disabled or we know people who are disabled in our family. We've all been immigrants at some point. Yes, even the natives, they came over a land bridge, right? So it's no, that's not an important point with that. But anyway, it's a system that the cogs kind of meet. But so you can't really have a system where, to kind of take that over for shits and giggles. Like, who would do that? And it's really not even a misunderstanding of things. It's a misunderstanding that turns into kind of like kind of a game of telephone and a propaganda stream. And people literally propagandizing, and they don't even know that they're wrong. And that's unfortunate. You have some very intelligent people on kind of the far left, and they're kind of, instead of having an easier time of going into adulthood because they're intelligent and they're well-meaning and all that stuff, which are generally kind of things that employers want. Instead of them, being successful in the workforce, they're kind of seeing these injustices. That's why they're social justice warriors, right? They're seeing these injustices everywhere that they have to kind of devote their life to. But what they're really devoting their life to is kind of the communist agenda of getting, stealing your parents' wallet. But it's an imaginary parent that doesn't exist. It's literally your wallet if you think about it. So it's just misled and misinformed. And that's fine. I don't want to, sit here and say that these people are evil. In fact, like I said, they're well-meaning, very intelligent, some of them. And in fact, if they weren't so propagandized against into this kind of misinformation pile, they probably wouldn't hold these views. I'm all for protesting, right? An idea that's bad or a policy. Like in France, they go, oh, you're going to lower, unemployment or some other kind of social program. At least it's a program that's real. At least it's something that, no, you're not going to do that, right? Because these kind of amorphous protests against imaginary fascists. I'm sure there are, an actual alt-right somewhere, but I've never seen it. I've just seen kind of like, centrist conservatives. The furthest right I've really seen is kind of like Ben Shapiro. And he makes a lot of pretty decent points. I don't like. I remember he said something about a transgender, like we don't want to financially support your delusion. It's a very dickish kind of thing to say. That's kind of the worst statement I've ever seen from one of these kind of, people on the right. And if they're not saying we believe in eugenics and setting certain people, the poor on fire, or this skin color or people from this country, it doesn't sound like the kind of the Nazi, fascist, crazy people that they're referring to. I'm sure they're there, but they're pretty underground. I think that they were more of a thing 20 years ago, and they've been so heavily pushed underground that they ceased to be a thing. No one's going on YouTube and professing to be a Nazi, and this is how we killed the rest of the Jews. That's just not happening. I've seen some jokes with swastikas. And people dressing up like Hitler in like a kind of skit. That's a much different thing than actually being Hitler. So that's just kind of my take on things. But it's a little bit to the side. My basic point is that communism is basically it's a red herring, like the phrase says. It's, people have this kind of imaginary utopian government that takes care of them in ways that aren't really appropriate for a government to be involved in, and they're not really sure why they're pushing for it. They're not really sure what they're pushing for. It's just like a pile of misinformation. And they're misreading the problems that we have that need solutions, which they might be great people to look for those solutions. They're mistaken the problems as most often it's very hyperbolic, very dramatic and exaggerated. And, they use a starving kid, but he's not really starving, because he lives in one of the states of the United States, so his starving is, you get a certain amount of food stamps, and then they use that as kind of we have to change the entire system. Very weak argument to change the entire system into kind of a communist system, because there are problems that we haven't figured out how to really solve yet, or they don't like the solutions. Let's say you have to eat at some sort of state cafeteria or a soup kitchen. It's well, why should I have to do that just because I'm homeless and poor and stuff? That's almost they're kind of seeing that as a cruel punishment. And it isn't. It just is what it is, and it sucks. No one says it's great, I'm not really talking about homelessness because, we really should be giving people some sort of shelter. But when you're in one of those shelters, it's, they're not fun, right? They're not great. But it's not like a punishment. You go to big cities, a lot of the people working there are going to have really nasty attitudes and see you all as criminals, and, that's something to be, looked at and to be, how can we kind of change that? But getting a big house in the suburbs instead, maybe not so much. A lot of these things are inadequate, and I'm the first to admit that. And they need to be fixed, they need to be improved. And that's, kind of logical progression. Once you have these kind of programs, you have to start kind of looking at making them efficient, but also better at the same time. And that's not an easy thing to do, right? Because a lot of times you just have budgetary constraints and you have to make them more efficient. But usually that means that they're going to suck. So to actually make it more efficient and make it better takes more than just the people who fell into social service jobs. In fact, they're kind of the wrong people, the exact wrong people to look at and say, hey, can you help improve this? You really need kind of people of a higher education level, etc., to figure out how to run these things better. And we don't have that yet. We haven't really got that thought into the zeitgeist. A politician will, I'm going to give money to X, Y, and Z. People perceive that that's helping the poor, even if it doesn't really, or it may even be hurting them. The poor, or the just intransigent, right? And then he gets votes and he keeps getting elected, and no one ever really finds out that the people that are being served aren't really being served, or they're not being served well. It's not helping them become independent. But those things crop up when you're spending money on a system and somebody else is paying for it. Those people paying for it, every once in a while go, hey, why are you taking my money for this? It's not even working. It doesn't even do anything. So if you're going to have these kind of programs, you also want them to be efficient and have good outcomes, right? Even if that outcome is they're in a state mental institution and they have to stay there the rest of their lives, you don't want them to be in kind of a place that they're being like robbed and beaten up every day, right? And that's kind of more the liberal kind of point of view. I know some conservatives don't care. Some conservatives are more in the line of, like I said, kind of extreme Republican thing. Why give them anything? But again, that's not most of us. It's really just differing levels. I say, get to a level that works. That's the budget. That's the best budget, the one that works. But you have to look at how to make it efficient, how to make it a kind of a good deal for the taxpayers, right? That's the responsibility, what's called a fiduciary responsibility. And we're not doing that yet. And that's really more that what needs to change, as opposed to let's be communists. Why? Because the water in Flint has lead in it. Well, let's be communist. That's like their answer for everything. If we were communists, it would be better. No, not so much. Probably be much, much, much worse. Because there wouldn't be that productivity for us to actually, take in tax revenue and then kind of help people at the bottom. There just wouldn't be that productivity. In fact, with the disappearance of the middle class, as that kind of shrinks, we're seeing kind of, we've seen states kind of go belly up. We've seen like all sorts of fiscal problems. It's getting better now, but it's in the past it was pretty bad. Anyway, so I guess I'm trying to explain how I'm a liberal and what that means, as opposed to kind of this communist agenda, where it's jump to the well, if we were all communists, this would all be taken care of. But remember that you have to put your productivity into this communist network, and it's most people don't want to do that, right? Because they're not getting directly paid for it, so they don't see the advantages, right? Even if you are providing for them quite well, they're going to be like, well, I still want more. You give somebody a little twin like college bed, which kind of sucks. They're going to want a full-size regular bed. That's just kind of human nature. If they had nothing before that, that fucking college bed is awesome. That kind of like paper thin mattress. That's you got to put it on the floor because there's no box spring. It's like a cot. Some of you who went to college have gone through that experience. It's lovely. So, in closing, being liberal doesn't mean being a communist or even being a socialist. It just means whatever avenue we take, we try to make things better for people, to provide a better safety net and a more effective one. I know that actually sounds a little bit more conservative, but it kind of does merit conservatism in that you want to have a better system, not necessarily more expensive, just a better system for everybody involved. All right, more bang for your buck and more positive outcomes. And that's something worth working towards as opposed to just, tearing apart and saying, let's be communists. So that's it. That's all for me. And I know this one's a pretty lengthy one. Thank you for listening. I appreciate your patience.